how did it then feel when Joe announces to you, look, I'm stepping away?
Hey, friendo, Steve here.
And Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Jeremy Lambert from Fightful.com. So welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. How are you?
I'm really good. Like, to peel the curtain back, I almost thought this weren't going to happen because we've had a few technical snafus.
That's par for the course with seemingly everything that I'm on. There's going to be technical difficulties. Joseph and I would joke about that all the time.
Fair enough. So if we take this back, before your work with Fightful, before any of your work in the wrestling media, where does Jeremy first discover wrestling?
It was Arn Anderson and Ric Flair against Vader from like Clash of Champions in like '95. My parents were just flipping through and I saw it and I thought it looked cool and we watched it for a little bit. And then I ended up going to World War III, 1995 at the Norfolk Scope with WCW. I was a big WCW fan back in time. And so it really just started then, 1995. I just got into it and then just started watching both WCW and WWF at the time and started playing with wrestling figures. And pretty much from that point on, I always knew I wanted to do something, whether it be wrestling or any type of sports. Like that's what I wanted to do with my life.
That's really cool to hear. So with 1995, by critics and fans alike, that is panned as maybe one of the worst years in wrestling. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I'm terrible with dates, but I was like 8 years old, like 7 years old. So like, to me, I thought it was cool. I didn't really have an issue with it as a 7 and 8 year old. I was like, oh, this rules.
Yeah. But I guess the general gist of my question is, if you were to discover that sort of wrestling now, at the age you are now, with everything that you've accumulated knowledge-wise, would you be a bit like, nah, this is crap?
I mean, maybe, but like I like the dumb stuff. So like 1995 was awful with the dumb stuff with Hulk Hogan and the Dungeon of Doom and the different characters in WWE. So like all that stuff is very fun to me. So I would probably like it almost sarcastically and memely, like, this is great. Like NXT 2.0, I can see why a lot of people don't like it. But when I watch it, I was like, oh, this is very stupid. I can understand why the general population isn't watching it, but I find it to be so dumb and silly that I can enjoy it and like laugh at it.
For you to enjoy wrestling, does it have to have a certain amount of, oh, be careful how I phrase this, suspension of disbelief, in the sense of like something silly happening for you to enjoy it?
I like wrestling that is either like really, really good or really, really bad, because there's so much wrestling that's just like good, right? Like you can turn on you can watch Raw every week and there's like good matches. Yeah. And it's fine. Like they're not very memorable. AEW always just has like really good matches, but like I need it to be in like this, just something super memorable that sticks with me forever. Or I need it to be so awful that I can like laugh at it and then I'll still forget it like 2 days later. But if I can laugh at it, like that's more important to me than, hey, here's this really cool wrestling match where both guys did great at.
I think, and I'll quote Stephen Larson on this from the Guy in Raw podcast, because they've said this a lot. The worst kind of wrestling is boring wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
So as we move on in your journey as a wrestling fan, have you had like a gap? Like how much were you consuming during the Attitude Era?
Attitude Era, like I was all in. Like my biggest gap was probably when I was like in college, which was 2006, 2007 time. I kept up with it through like results and stuff, but I wasn't watching like weekly or anything like that. And now, honestly, like so much of it just blends together from basically post WCW all the way until I started covering it every single day. Like a lot of that stuff blends together. Like I've seen it, I can like recall a chunk of it, but I can't tell you like years or anything like that. And like a lot of it gets just so repetitive through like the Edge, Cena kind of stuff that it all just blends together for me.
Okay. So do you remember what drove you away at that time? Or was it sort of a like life got in the way sort of situation?
Having a life, being in college, I just didn't have time to like watch wrestling and keep up with it as much as I could have. That's why I would watch what I like could at the time, and I would read results, but I just did not have the capacity to watch it weekly when I'm in college and trying to earn a degree and hanging out with friends and stuff.
What is something from your gap that you've gone back and watched, maybe through work, through Fightful, just on your downtime, that you're like, I wish I was a fan during this era?
I so like ROH kind of got me back into wrestling, and I discovered ROH like a few years later, because I wasn't watching at the time it started. But when I was in college and stuff, I would hear about like guys like Samoa Joe and Danielson, AJ Styles, and CM Punk, and like I would go and watch their matches. Nowadays, like I don't go back and watch like a ton of wrestling. And if I do, I typically just throw on something that I kind of know, because truthfully, like if I did miss something back in the day, but I heard it was good, I would watch it like the next day or something. I just wasn't watching like weekly or anything like that. So I was still like up on it and still like watching stuff. It's just, it wasn't like appointment viewing for me.
Oh, I get you. So like it'd be the equivalent for like me over here in the UK. There's soap opera called EastEnders, where if I hear about like a cool storyline, I will sit and watch it. But then like I wouldn't watch it religiously, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Like I watched like a lot of the Cena stuff. I watched like Nexus was obviously a big hot angle. CM Punk when he won the title, and they tried to do Summer Punk, things like that. When Danielson came into WWE, I was very excited. So like I watched a lot of that stuff when it happened. So like yeah, I was keeping up with a lot of it.
Okay. So then how do you eventually come to work in the wrestling industry? Was Fightful your first job?
No, it actually started because I was writing about MMA. I covered season 5 of The Ultimate Fighter for 411 Mania, and this is when I was still in college. And so I started writing about MMA. I developed a good friendship with the GOAT, Larry Zonka. And so like once kind of like MMA stuff was like, MMA was very prevalent during that time, but I think he maybe saw something in me and knew I was a wrestling fan as well. It's like, hey, like, do you want to do like wrestling columns as well? And so like I started doing wrestling columns for the site as well. And I'd covered TNA and even WWE SmackDown for Inside Pulse during like 2004. So that actually might have been my first gig, even dating back to even predating the Ultimate Fighter stuff. It was actually writing about weekly TNA columns and doing live coverage of SmackDown, like when Eddie was champion, when Guerrero was champion, feuding with JBL. So that was when I was like covering SmackDown every week.
Okay. So then everyone that I've spoke to from Fightful has a really like unique story of how they connected with Sean Ross Sapp. So how did you get connected with Sean Ross Sapp?
James Lynch, from MMA side of things, he retweeted something of Sean that Fightful was looking for like people to basically like recap and cover the UFC post-fight press conferences. And so I saw that tweet. And so I reached out to Sean and was like, hey, I'm interested in this. Like, here's kind of what I've done. And, I'd covered MMA for 411. So I had a good background in knowing what I was talking about when it came to MMA. And then Sean was like, cool, like you're hired. It took a little while. Like I reached out to Sean when he was on vacation and he didn't get back to me for weeks. And he's a jerk for that.
Yeah.
But he eventually got back to me. And my first one was the St. Pierre. I'm terrible with the numbers, but St. Pierre and Bisbing at Madison Square Garden. That was the first UFC post-fight press conference that I covered. And that was my first like kind of talking with Sean. And it was a very like small relationship because I was working essentially like once a month for him, like just doing work for him like one day out of the month.
What is something you took from your previous jobs as a writer and took to your work with Fightful, and then what is something you didn't take, was like, okay, I'm going to leave this here?
I think work ethic was something I definitely just kind of took. Like I worked with Larry Zonka, and I think his work ethic is second to none. When he was when there was like big shows like the G1 tournament, WrestleMania weekend, like anything, he was covering and reviewing like every single wrestling show under the sun. Plus he was doing news, plus he was doing podcasts. Like that man never stopped writing and working. And like I lived close to him, so I had a good relationship with him, and I had stayed at his house, and like I saw how he would balance like work, family life, all this different stuff. And so like that's kind of what I took when I eventually moved up in the world of Fightful. And some stuff that I didn't take was just kind of just bad habits of I guess being open to feedback, because sometimes when you're just like, a lot of these sites, they don't give you feedback. It's just like they're just happy to have like content. And so that was it. Like it didn't matter how good or bad your content was. They're just like, oh, cool, like you're doing something for us. We're happy with that. And I had to learn how to be more open to feedback with Sean of like, hey, like you need to do this better, you need to do that better. And or like we do it this way, that way. And I had to just kind of learn that, okay, this works a little bit differently.
Okay. And then, so you joined Fightful in the MMA aspect. So how much of an MMA fan were you at this point? Or was MMA something that you could literally go, this is something I do for work?
I was a bigger MMA fan than a wrestling fan at this time. Like I really enjoyed MMA, and I covered MMA for 411, and I would review like a lot of the shows. I would go to a lot of the shows, attend the shows. I would interview fighters and stuff. I also worked for 5 Ounces of Pain, doing that kind of stuff. So like I was a very big MMA fan. And then as I started doing more work with Fightful and staying up till 3-4 a.m. covering the post-fight press conferences, I stopped caring about it as much because it just became a lot. And then they started running shows every single week. And then there were just so many fighters that like I just couldn't keep up with or didn't care to keep up with. It just became overwhelming in how much I wanted like to put effort into when it came to MMA.
Okay. So then do you have a conversation with Sean where you're like, I'm not the biggest MMA fan anymore, can I move over to wrestling? Or did he approach you for that?
No, it was what had happened there was Sean was like kind of always looking for like kind of wrestling contributor kind of stuff, because Fightful was very young at this point. And so like I would do like an occasional news post when they needed help, and I would do like G1 columns for New Japan, and Sean seemed to appreciate that kind of stuff. And then Pat Fannin was leaving the news side of things. He did the daily weekday news for Fightful, and Sean just put out another tweet of like, hey, looking for a new weekday news writer for wrestling. And I always liked wrestling more than MMA growing up. And like I was kind of getting a little burnt out on MMA because there just was so many shows. And like I'd been doing this for a very long time when it comes to writing, and I wrote for a lot of different gigs. I thought this would just be like a good, steady kind of like income finally when it comes to writing and stuff. So that was one of the bigger selling points. Is I was just like, hey, this is a good steady writing gig in a field that I like and that I enjoy working in, or covering a sport that I like. So Sean put out that he was looking for news writers. I was like, hey, can I like throw my hat in this ring? And he was like, yeah, like I like to promote with it from within anyway. So this would be great. You already know kind of our style and everything. Like you know, I know your work ethic and stuff. And so that's how I ended up getting the weekday news writing gig.
What have you put in place now to stop you because you said you got burnt out with wrestling? MMA. Have you put anything in place so now you don't get burnt out with wrestling?
Absolutely not. I feel burnt out with wrestling a lot because I get up at like 6 o'clock and I start like working on new stuff. And this is Monday through Friday. And then I'm doing podcasts. I'm trying to do different things. And like, I'm not only just like watching the shows, I'm listening to interviews with wrestlers and stuff. I just listened to a 2.5 hour interview with Mike Mansory, who was the former vice president of global television with WWE. So like I'm listening to interviews all day, plus watching the shows. It's very easy to get burnt out when you're like kind of in deep as it that I am. And I 100% get burnt out. What I've put in place is I have a great support system. Sean knows kind of my value. And so like, if I need to take time off or like step away, he understands that. And I have a family. And so like having a fiance and kids, I'm able to just step out of that wrestling bubble sometimes and realize that, hey, this is what is important in life, not this transcription article or this news article that, you know, people online, they seem to enjoy my headlines and stuff. But like at the end of the day, it's not really like all that important. Like the family that I have and I'm building is really what's important.
Yeah, your family seems like something that's very important to you, because you were very specific on, I can do this interview at this time, but any later is no good. And I was cool with that, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, my future stepkids come first, and my fiance and future wife, like they're always going to come first. I'm not like, there are exceptions to be made, and my fiance is very supportive of everything that I do, and that's been a big help. Is she understands like what my job is, but at the end of the day, like I'm putting them first. So knowing that and like trying to balance that helps a little bit with the burnt out. But there are certainly mornings where I wake up and I'm like, fuck, I don't feel like, oh, sorry, can I curse?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
I'm not monetized
All right.
anyway.
All right. There are mornings where I wake up and I'm like, oh man, like, I just don't feel like listening to this person talk and give this generic interview today. So I always make the joke of like, I actually don't like wrestling, but I do like work. Like I do enjoy like what I do for a living.
Mm-hmm. So when I had Joe Holbert on, he discussed the fact that distraction came about because you were starting to get burnt out with news stuff.
Yeah.
And you wanted to maybe start a podcast. So what are your memories of starting Distraction?
I was stoned on like 2 days before Christmas, and Joseph and I had always had like a good like banter friendship on, because he did MMA news writing for a little while, and then he just found out like that wasn't for him. But when he was in our group chat, like we would always banter about, and on Twitter we'd always banter about, and we did like a TEW series, and we just had really good, like a good relationship and a good chemistry. Oh, go ahead.
No.
Okay.
I was sort of nodding, and I have like weird tics.
You're fine. You're fine. But we had always had a good relationship, and I just thought he would be a good person to like do the podcast with, because we got on well, and we had similar thinking of sort of how we wanted to like talk about and cover wrestling. And so I reached out to him at like 2 a.m. my time when I was stoned. I was like, hey, let's do a podcast. Here's my idea. And what my original plan like never actually panned out, and it was for the better that it like never fully panned out. But he was in, and we started it like just a couple weeks later.
So what are some of your best memories of doing Distraction?
The entire thing.
Okay.
I mean that like there were so many great moments that we did. I thought we did something unique and different, and it was a lot of fun for me. Just the way we would like the covering the wrestling part was fun, just talking about him with that, but just the ideas that we were able to bounce off of each other, and the way we would cover it, and the way we would just the banter and the chemistry that we had. Like there were the show we did with Andrew Thompson, where we did like a first take style show, when we ended up doing cold opens, that was a lot of fun. When we did a live show at the NBA trade deadline, which Joseph messaged me. He's like, hey, can we do it? This is our first ever like live show. It's like, can we do this live? And I was like, yeah, let me like figure this out. And we did. And it was during the NBA trade deadline. We did the storyline with O'Neal, where he introduced Robert O'Neal in the corner 3 and everything, like that whole storyline that led to him shaving his head. Like just about everything we did is a great memory.
How did it then feel when Joe announces to you, look, I'm stepping away?
It sucked. It was hard, and I wish we could have worked something out with it, because I miss that, at least the weekly show. I understand he wanted to do different stuff, but I miss those times.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of, when I had him on my show, cheap plug, check that interview out if you haven't already. He said that there was a lot of stuff he may have done differently when it came to his departure. So is there anything you would change about the way he left?
I just wish we would have talked about it a little bit more. That's the biggest thing. I wish we would have talked about it, and we maybe could have just found common ground on stuff. I don't know. I do wish I could have made things more of a priority, because I was burnt out on news, like 100%. And I was trying very hard to get more stuff added on the news side to where I was less burnt out. I wish I changed up my schedule earlier. Like now, like we talked about family. My personal life, I won't go into everything, but a lot changed in December. And then I didn't have a lot of time to adjust, and I tried to just keep going at my pre-December schedule.
You tried to stay on the wheel by the time.
Yes. Yeah. I tried to keep going on that schedule, and I just couldn't do it. And now I've done a better job of just adjusting my schedule. Like now I still get up at 6 because my kids get up at 6. And so I'm up with them. And so I just start like writing new stuff. But I used to just burn myself out, and I would go to like 6 to like 11. Like that was my day, and I would do like a lot of new stuff. And like I was burnt out by like 5 o'clock, and we would do shows at like 5 o'clock, and I didn't have a lot to give those shows. And Joseph did a tremendous job of carrying pretty much all of those shows. And I wish I could have given more, or I wish we would have talked about it more. And I wish I had adjusted my schedule earlier, and I wish I would have just made that side more of a priority. I just always couldn't, because one, my money comes from the news writing. Like that's where a lot of my value is. And I put a lot of pride into doing that kind of stuff. And I was just bad at like balancing work and personal life for that. I'm still not the best at it, but I'm doing a better job at it. But yeah, I would have changed, like mainly that is like trying to balance stuff, trying to figure out like changing up my schedule and making like that side of things more of a priority.
And I appreciate you being so open, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
What was I going to say? How does then the spotlight with Steven Jensen come into your life?
I wanted to continue doing a weekly show, because I enjoy doing like the weekly show. I enjoy like I've said, that is my break from news writing. And I couldn't do the distraction. That's me and Joseph. I didn't even know what I was going to do after that. Like I had no idea. Mm-hmm. I just knew like it was never going to be recreated. It was never going to be duplicated. So I had to figure out just, okay, what's like different, but like, what's different essentially? Like, how can we just do something different? And it came about because I wanted to, pardon the pun here, like spotlight other companies that maybe like haven't been talked about enough on the Fightful main channel. Because you go to the Fightful main channel, a lot of WWE, a lot of AEW talk. And I get it. Yeah. Those are the two biggest companies. So like, that's completely understandable. But there's a million other companies out there. And I wanted to just have them to have more of a presence. And I like Steven Jensen watches more like independent wrestling than like anybody I know. And so I've always had a good relationship with Jensen. We've done shows and stuff together. So I reached out to him, be like, hey, here's kind of my idea. What do you think? And he was all about it as well. So that's how that came about. Is I wanted to continue to do something weekly, and I needed to do something differently than the distraction. And I knew I just couldn't recreate that. And so I wanted to just feel realize, all right, what are my priorities and like what do I want to put out there, and what do I want to use this platform for? Because Fightful is a big platform, and Sean has trusted me with a lot of responsibility, whether it be the spotlight or overbooked. Like, he's trusted me with all this stuff, and so I had this platform. How am I going to use it? What am I going to do on it? And Spotlight was a way to like spotlight other companies and now content creators and wrestlers who maybe weren't given this platform before, because Fightful is so much AEW, WWE, and like big star like kind of interviews and coverage.
I get you. So what do you think makes Spotlight different from Distraction? And then what do you think makes your chemistry with Steven different from your chemistry with Joe?
It's a completely different show. Again, Distraction for a time, and certainly by the end, like it almost became less about, like, I think people tuned in less for like what we talked about wrestling wise, and more for just like what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. Like the wrestling talk almost became secondary to just like our chemistry and our banter. That's how I felt about things. And with Jensen, it's completely different. I think people are actually there for the wrestling talk and there for that more than like our banter, which we have, but it's more straightforward. Let's talk about wrestling. Like we do interviews. We never really did interviews on Distraction outside of like a couple of early shows. But we do that stuff. It's a completely different show with two different people who have different talents and skills in what they talk about when it comes to wrestling.
Fair enough. So as we look at wrapping this up, because I do want to be respectful of your time, we're going to do a segment that I call generic questions, which fans of mine that have seen my interviews before will know this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay-per-view, favorite tag team, and their favorite theme song of all time. Because basically, this will now give them a place to go when they get asked these questions on Twitter. I've been asked this, go check this out. So what's your favorite match of all time, Jeremy?
Oh, I'm horrible at this favorite stuff, by the way. So I apologize. You're gonna get some terrible answers. My favorite match of all time is it's the Doomsday cage match at WCW Uncensored 95 between the Dungeon of Doom, the Alliance to End Hulkamania, and Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. It's a god-awful match. Nobody should watch it, but it just pops me in how bad it is and just how silly it is. And again, that's the kind of stuff that I will watch and I will enjoy over, hey, let me watch this great wrestling match between Bryan Danielson and Hangman Page, which is a great match. I do love both of those matches, but I'll watch like that Doomsday cage match 100 times before I'll watch Danielson and Page again, which probably says a lot about like my wrestling taste.
Is that because as well you don't have to like with Brian and Hangman? I imagine you were covering that, whereas that other match, the Doomsday Cage, is linked more to childhood, so it's like
probably
a match that you can put on and just be like, yeah, I'm gonna stick this on just for fun.
Yeah, but like Brett Austin from Survivor Series and Mania like are both great matches, and I'd still like pick Doomsday Cage match because I just like the silliness in pro wrestling. Like everyone, I guess also like I like to just be stupid and different. It's like everyone's just going to name like, hey, this great match that they love, and I'm just going to be like, yeah, this Doomsday Cage match that like no one probably remembers or everyone thinks sucks. This is my favorite match of all time.
Fair enough. What about favorite pay-per-view of all time?
Honestly, it's probably Mania 30, and it's because I was there.
I was just going to say, it's split into two categories, if you don't mind. There, and then one that you were watching at home.
Okay. Watching at home, probably Mania 12, because that was, and I love Brett and Sean, the Iron Man match. I know there's a lot of mixed opinions of that match. I love that match. That's another one that actually is like one of my favorites of all time. It's just something that I won't sit back and watch, because anything that's like, my wrestling wheelhouse is like 12 to 18 minutes. You give me a good like 12 to 18 minute match, I'm in. Anything over like 18 minutes, and I'm just like, all right, I have time to sit down and watch you all day. Like it's tough to go back to and rewatch like an hour long match. But WrestleMania 12, because it was the first like wrestling pay-per-view that I had ordered. And then either Mania 30 or All Out from this past year, because I was at both of those events and they're both great.
Mm-hmm. What about favorite tag team of all time?
It almost sounds generic to say like the Young Bucks, but they're like very quickly climbing up this list for me, which I know sounds weird because I hate modern wrestling. That's the gimmick that I portrayed on this, but I really do like the Young Bucks. I don't know. I don't connect with tag team wrestling as much as others. I appreciate it. I enjoy it. I love a lot of the matches, but I'm not somebody who like kind of connects with that as much as I know like others do. And I have a tough time thinking of like all the great tag teams from like my childhood. Like I like the New Age Outlaws because they're like opening gimmick and stuff. Their opening riff.
Yeah.
I love that. But yeah, like honestly, like the Young Bucks, that's a team that I can just probably like just throw on their matches and be very satisfied with.
What about favorite theme song?
Favorite theme song is like that. It's probably just like Austin's or Shawn Michaels.
Disturbed version or non-disturbed version?
No, non-disturbed version. Yeah, just like the glass breaking. It's something from my childhood. I like Hogan. Even not even Real American, but American Made. Like I love that song from his WCW time. Like I love that song. So it's something from the '90s for sure. More I like a lot of the theme songs today, mainly in AEW. There's some good ones, but yeah, something from the '90s that like instantly that I just have like a childhood memory of. John Cena's theme song, I love. Like I just listened to that just randomly.
Word Life or
no, My Time Is Now. Yeah, My Time Is Now. Like that's like on my actual like, hey, listen to this in the car kind of playlist.
Fair enough. And as we look at wrapping this up, because I've just had the timer come up on the Zoom. What's it called? Favorite wrestler or superstar of all time?
All time, probably Austin. Like I was always a big like Hogan fan growing up as a kid, but then once Austin like really took off, I became a huge Austin fan. So it's him. There's Michaels, there's Brett, newer era, and by newer era I mean like 20 years ago. Cena was my guy throughout that entire era. Like I loved him. I know people didn't, but him. And then like current kind of guys like Danielson. I think Danielson's the GOAT, and so like he's my favorite like current guy. But like all time, like it's Austin. Like when he returned at Mania, like I was pretty hyped for it.
I was as well, and I didn't grow up with Austin. But as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on, Jeremy, is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of way. So what is one video or podcast or article in your case that you're like, don't go back and look at that. I've grown a lot since then. And then what is one that you're like, if you want to know my body of work, make sure you check that out.
Don't go back and look at like I used to do podcasts just like by myself in my bedroom, like trying to talk about like college football,
so
which I was not the biggest. No, I was not interviewing. I know we've interviewed like John Alba and stuff. I was not doing like any of that. Like I was talking about college football, and I did not know much about college football. Like it was very bad. Anything that I did like kind of Fightful is probably like horrible when it comes to like podcasting, and even some of the writing was good because I would just have like wacky generic or not generic but like wacky like off the wall kind of columns and stuff. But like podcasts that I did like pre-Fightful are all like pretty awful unless I was doing them with Larry Zonka. Those are good.
Fair
and
enough.
Then one that like I guess I like I don't know like as far as like podcasts, I think the show that Joseph and I did with Andrew Thompson, our like first take style show, I think that was like some of our peak work. Or we just did full like bit show and gimmick show. I thought that was great. And then like article wise, whatever like headlines kind of pops you. I can like pop myself with a new headline every day, but people love the Bryan Danielson tree semen headline. So like I guess that one where it's like, hey, if you want to know Jeremy Lambert, he wrote about Bryan Danielson and tree semen, and or the Veer coming one, which got Jim Cornette fired up. So like maybe that one is probably like, yeah, this is Jeremy, and people just seem to know like when I read a headline now. So I guess that's kind of cool.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Jeremy Lambert88. You can go to Fightful.com, and my name is on that website. You go to FightfulOverbooked.com, and that's a YouTube channel that I'm trying to be better at doing stuff with, and I should just overall be better at doing stuff on that channel.
It's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Rubbish. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Rubbish. Follow bodyslam.net for my show Wrestle Watch with Cassidy Haynes and TTR
Cass, that's the guy right there. Sorry to cut you off.
With my interviews. I fully agree with you, man. So yeah, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye. Bye.